My husband forced me to sleep in the car every night because my pregnancy kept disturbing his sleep until his mother accidentally discovered the truth and gave him a lesson he never forgot. The cot was still folded in its plastic wrapping when Dana threw it at her son's feet. "Open it," she said again, and this time her voice didn't shake. I stood behind her on the landing, one hand on the railing, the other cradling the hard round weight of my daughter, 8 months along and heavier than I'd ever felt in my life. Ryan's eyes went from the package to his mother to me, and I watched something come apart behind his face. Not guilt, not yet, just math. He was doing math, trying to figure out how much she knew and how fast he could talk his way around it. He had no idea she knew everything. He had no idea I did too, finally, after 2 years of not letting myself see it. "Mom, you don't understand what's actually— I understand that my daughter-in-law has been sleeping in a Honda Civic in the parking lot of the apartment I have been paying for," Dana said. "I understand that perfectly." The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. It felt like an hour. I would replay those 4 seconds so many times over the following months, in the attorney's office, in the forensic accountant's conference room, on the witness stand, that I could eventually describe the exact temperature of the air, the exact rasp of the box fan somebody had left running in 2B down the hall, the exact way Ryan's throat moved when he swallowed and still couldn't find anything to say. I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. I thought the cot was the ending, the confrontation, the reveal, the moment the truth finally cracked him open. I didn't know that Dana's 15-minute drive to get that camping cot from the back of her SUV was the smallest, gentlest part of what was coming. I didn't know that in 6 weeks I'd be sitting across from a forensic accountant named Priya Nataraj, looking at spreadsheets that made my stomach fold in on itself, or that a family law attorney named Robert Ashford would tell me flatly, "Emma, what he did to you has a name, and it's not just cruelty. Some of it's fraud." I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew I was standing on a landing at 3 in the morning, 8 months pregnant, watching my husband's face drain of color for the first time in 2 years. It had taken exactly that long to get here. 2 years earlier, when Ryan and I moved into the apartment on Larkspur Avenue, he'd made a whole production of it, walked me through the door blindfolded, hands over my eyes, and when he pulled them away, I saw a bouquet of grocery store carnations sitting in a jar on the kitchen counter and a handwritten note taped to the fridge that said, "Welcome home, Em. I've got us. I've got us." I used to think about that note a lot later in the car. I never threw it away. It's still in a shoebox somewhere, evidence of a version of him I spent 2 years trying to get back to. He worked in commercial insurance, a junior account role at a mid-sized firm downtown, and he talked about it like a man perpetually one promotion away from something bigger. I worked in medical billing and claims review for a hospital network, a job that doesn't sound glamorous at parties, but that had, over 6 years, trained my eyes to catch small inconsistencies the way some people catch typos, numbers that didn't reconcile, timelines that didn't line up. It's a skill you don't clock using in your own life until you desperately need it. We'd been married 14 months when I got pregnant. Ryan cried when I showed him the test, actual tears, the kind I hadn't seen from him since his father's funeral. For a while after that, things were good, better than good. He came to appointments. He read baby name books in bed, doing voices for the ridiculous ones just to make me laugh. He'd rest his hand on my stomach at night and whisper things to her that made my chest hurt with how much I loved him. I want to be fair to who he was then, because I think it matters for understanding how slowly the rest of it crept in. Ryan wasn't a monster from day one. He was, for most of the time I knew him, a genuinely funny, occasionally thoughtless, deeply competitive man who measured his own worth almost entirely by his job title and his paycheck. The kind of person who'd bring up his college GPA unprompted 3 years after graduating, who flinched a little every time a friend of ours got promoted before he did. I used to find that endearing in the early years. I told myself it meant he cared about providing for us. I didn't yet understand that a man who ties his entire identity to being the provider can become dangerous the moment he starts failing at it quietly, rather than admit the failure out loud. The first crack came so small I almost didn't register it as a crack at all. Loop 1. It was April, I was 5 months along, and Ryan started complaining about his back, said the mattress had gone soft on his side, said he wasn't sleeping. I offered to switch sides. I was the one who needed better support at that point, growing a person, but he said no, it wasn't the mattress, it was me, my tossing, my getting up to pee 4 times a night, my pillow fort of wedge cushions between my knees and under my belly that took up more and more of the bed as the months went on. He's just tired, I told myself. He's stressed about money, about the promotion that keeps not coming, about becoming a father. This is normal. Couples go through phases. Then one night in May, he suggested almost casually that I sleep on the couch. Just for a few nights, he said, just until he caught up on rest. I did it. I told myself it was temporary, a small kindness between 2 exhausted people. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister Rachel, 3 states away and knee-deep in her own toddler chaos. Not Kayla, my best friend since college, who would have shown up at my door within the hour if she'd known. I didn't tell anyone because some small, humiliated part of me had already started building a story where this made sense. Loop 2 came in June at my 28-week appointment. My OB, Dr. Naomi Castellano, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who delivered half the babies in our zip code over a 20-year career, took my blood pressure twice because she didn't like the first number. "It's a little elevated," she said. "How's your sleep?" "Fine," I said. It came out too fast. She looked at me over her glasses in a way that made my face go hot. "Emma, I've been doing this a long time. elevated blood pressure this late in pregnancy, especially combined with fatigue. I need to rule out preeclampsia, and I also need you to actually tell me how you're sleeping. I almost told her. I got as far as opening my mouth. Then I thought about how it would sound out loud. My husband makes me sleep on the couch because I move around too much, and how small and pathetic it would seem once it left my body and became real, and I closed my mouth and said something about swaddle blankets instead. She didn't push. She ordered extra blood work and told me to come back in 2 weeks instead of 4. I remember sitting in the parking garage afterward with my hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere, just sitting, feeling like I'd failed some test I hadn't known I was taking. Loop 3 was the couch becoming the car. It happened in July, a Tuesday, the night the couch itself apparently became a problem. Ryan said the springs were shot, that he could hear me shifting through the wall even from the bedroom, that he had a client presentation in the morning and needed real sleep. He held out my keys like he was offering me a gift. Reclining seats, he said. Problem solved. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters for anyone else living some version of this right now. I didn't fight him. I was too tired to fight him. 8 months pregnant is a state of exhaustion that doesn't leave room for confrontation. Your body is doing the hardest physical work it will ever do, around the clock, whether you're awake for it or not, and by the time someone hands you your keys at 3 in the morning, you have nothing left to argue with. So I took the keys. I walked down 3 flights of stairs in flip-flops, in August heat that hadn't broken even at that hour, and I sat in my Honda Civic and cried until the sky started going gray at the edges. At 6:34 a.m., my phone buzzed. You can come back up now. No apology. No, are you okay? Just permission. Delivered like I was a dog, he'd decided to let back inside after leaving me out in the rain. That became our life. Every night around 10, pillow under my arm, down the stairs. I learned which step creaked, the 4th from the bottom, and I started skipping it out of some instinct to move through my own home without being noticed. Every morning, waiting for his text like a prisoner waiting for a guard to unlock a cell. That's not a dramatic comparison. That's exactly what it felt like. Loop 4 was the morning I nearly told the truth and didn't, and it broke something in me more than any single night in the car had. It was early August, another appointment, and Dr. Castellano's frown had deepened along with the numbers on my chart. My blood pressure hadn't come down. I'd lost 2 pounds I shouldn't have lost. She sat across from me, took off her glasses entirely, and said the thing that I still hear sometimes, in quiet moments, almost 2 years later. Emma, I need you to hear me clearly. Sleep deprivation this late in pregnancy isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. For you and for her. I'm not asking to be nosy. I'm asking because I think something at home is keeping you from resting, and I need you to tell me what it is, because I cannot protect 2 patients I don't understand. My throat closed up so completely I thought I might actually choke. For 1 full second, I almost said it. My husband makes me sleep in my car. I could feel the shape of the sentence in my mouth. Then I looked away and asked about swaddle blankets instead, for the 2nd time, as though repetition would make the deflection more convincing. She didn't believe me. I watched her not believe me. But there's a particular kind of shame that moves faster than honesty, and it got me out of that office before she could ask again. At home that evening, Ryan whistled while he scrambled eggs, kissed my forehead on his way to the fridge, behaved in every visible way like a man who hadn't spent 2 months exiling his pregnant wife to a parking lot. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway watching him and thinking, genuinely, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe this is just what it looks like when a marriage is under pressure and a baby is coming. I want to say clearly, for anyone reading this who has thought some version of that thought about their own life, you are not the problem. I know that now. I did not know it then. Loop 5 was the night everything cracked open, and it started with headlights on my windshield at 2 in the morning. Dana Whitfield, Ryan's mother, a retired elementary school vice principal who still spoke in the calm, load-bearing voice of someone used to talking down hallways full of screaming children, had come by unannounced to drop off a maternity pillow she'd found on sale, the kind of small errand mothers do at reasonable hours, except she'd hit weekend traffic coming back from her sister's and ended up arriving well past midnight instead. She saw my Civic in the lot. She saw me in it. She knocked on the window in her bathrobe, hair flat on one side, face gone the color of paper. Emma, why are you sleeping out here? I broke completely. Everything came out at once. The keys, the stairs, the 4th step that creaked, the morning texts, all of it, in no particular order, punctuated by the kind of crying that comes from somewhere below language. Dana went quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped into something I hadn't heard from her before. Flat, controlled, dangerous in its stillness. He said, "What to you?" I nodded, unable to answer through the crying. She looked up at our dark bedroom window like she was looking at a stranger's house. "I can't believe I raised a son like this," she said. "Stay here. I'll be right back." She returned 15 minutes later with the camping cot wrapped in brown paper and helped me out of the car with a gentleness that made my spine crack audibly as I stood, her own face tightening in a wince that mirrored my pain. "You should not be doing this," she said. "Not 8 months pregnant. Not for 1 single night, let alone. How long has this been going on, Emma?" "Since May," I whispered. "The couch first, then the car in July." Something moved through her face that I can only describe as recalibration, like she was rebuilding an entire understanding of her son from the studs up. We climbed the 3 flights together, her carrying the cot like a weapon, me gripping the railing with one hand and my belly with the other. "He's going to be furious," I said. "Good. He'll blame me. me. He always finds a way to make it about something I did. She stopped on the landing and looked at me directly. Emma, you have done nothing wrong. You are growing a human being in a body that hurts, and he put you in a car in August heat rather than lose an hour of sleep. Tonight, you stand behind me. I talk. Yes, ma'am. She knocked 3 times. Ryan opened the door half asleep, and the sight of his mother standing there at 2:30 in the morning did more to wake him up than anything else could have. Mom, what are you doing here? She held out the package. A surprise. Open it. His hand shook slightly, tearing off the paper. Inside was the folded camping cot. Starting tonight, Dana said, you sleep on this, in the hallway. You can't just— Oh, I can, she said. Why don't you tell your wife who's actually been paying this rent for the last 2 years, Ryan? I have relived his face in that moment more times than I can count. Every drop of color left it at once. Mom, come on. You don't mean that. Not right now. I mean every word, Dana said, and I am nowhere near finished. She turned to me and her voice went gentle again, the load-bearing calm returning. For 2 years, honey, I've been wiring money every month to cover most of this apartment. His paycheck alone never came close to it. He never told you that. I assumed all this time that you two were managing it together, that it was a temporary bridge while he built up his career. I didn't know he was letting you believe he was carrying this himself. I didn't know he was letting you carry the parking lot on top of it. The floor seemed to genuinely tilt under me. 2 years. I had spent 2 years believing our modest, tightly budgeted apartment was something we'd built together, something we could afford on our own steam if we were careful. And instead, I had been sleeping in my own car while my mother-in-law quietly wired thousands of dollars a month to keep the lights on above my head. Mom, that's not the whole picture. You don't understand the account. I'm not finished, Dana said again, and something in the specificity of the account, his slip, not hers, made my stomach drop even further than it already had. What Dana didn't fully know yet, and what none of us would understand until weeks later, was that the account was the tip of something much larger. 2 days after the cot appeared in our hallway, I called my sister Rachel for the first time in months and told her everything. She didn't say I told you so, though she had every right to. She said, Emma, you need a lawyer and you need one today, not next week. She gave me the name of a family law attorney she'd used during her own divorce, Robert Ashford, a man with 22 years in family and matrimonial law, half of them spent, according to his firm bio, specifically on cases involving financial concealment in marriages. I sat in Ashford's office 4 days later, 8.5 months pregnant, a folder of screenshotted texts and bank statements in my lap that I'd assembled with shaking hands the night before. His office smelled like old paper and coffee, and he had the unhurried, unshockable manner of someone who had heard worse than my story many times over. Tell me about the money first, he said, after I'd gotten through the car and the cot. Everything you know about your household finances, who pays what, whose name is on what. I told him what I knew, which felt, in the telling, embarrassingly small. Joint checking account. Ryan handled the rent transfer each month. I handled utilities and groceries out of my own paycheck. I'd never seen his pay stubs directly. He'd shown me a number once, early on, and I'd taken it at face value the way you take most things at face value with someone you've married. Ashford made a note and looked up. I want to bring in someone before we go further, a forensic accountant. Given what your mother-in-law told you about the rent, and given that you've never independently verified his income, I think there's more here than a sleep dispute, and I want documentation before he has time to clean anything up. That was the first time I heard the phrase that would define the next month of my life, before he has time to clean anything up. Priya Nataraj had been a forensic accountant for 14 years, the last 8 of them specializing in matrimonial asset tracing. The kind of work, she explained in our first meeting, that mostly consists of finding the gap between what someone says they earn and what actually moves through their accounts. Before she'd agreed to take the case, Ashford's paralegal had walked me through what the engagement would actually look like. A subpoena duces tecum to Ryan's employer for 2 years of pay stubs and W-2s, a records request to every bank where his name appeared on an account, and a line-by-line reconciliation of every transfer in and out of our joint, checking against what he'd told me, verbally, our budget was. People think forensic accounting is dramatic, Priya told me, setting up her laptop across the conference table on our first meeting. Mostly it's just patience, spreadsheets and patience. The lie is never in the big number. It's in the small, boring transfer that happens on the same day every month and nobody ever double checks. She had a calm, methodical way of laying documents on a table, like a surgeon laying out instruments, bank statements in one stack, pay records in another, a highlighted timeline of joint account activity in a third, and within 20 minutes of cross-referencing them, her calm cracked slightly for the first time. Emma, I need to ask you something directly. Did you know your husband had a second checking account? I hadn't. I felt the floor do its tilting thing again, a sensation I was starting to get sick of. She turned her laptop toward me. There it was, an account at a bank we'd never used together, opened 14 months earlier, receiving direct deposits that didn't match the modest paycheck Ryan had always described. The real number was nearly 40% higher than what he'd told me he earned. He's been underreporting his income to you, Priya said, for at least the past 14 months, and routing the difference into an account you had no knowledge of. Combined with what you've told us about his mother covering the majority of the rent, he wasn't just letting her believe you two needed the help. He was pocketing the gap. How much? I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. She turned another page. Conservatively, over 14 months, just from the income discrepancy and the rent rent his mother was covering that he was also collecting reimbursement for from a joint account you didn't monitor closely. We're looking at just over $31,000. I put my hand over my mouth, not because of the number, exactly, though the number was staggering, because of what it meant. He hadn't just been cruel to me in the small, cumulative way of making me sleep somewhere degrading. He had been running an actual operation, quietly, for over a year, while I sat in a Honda Civic in August heat believing we were simply broke together. There's something else, Priya said, more gently now, watching my face. I want to flag it before you hear it anywhere else because I think it's going to matter to your case, and I don't want it to blindside you. Some of these transfers, the ones from the account his mother didn't know about, happened after your third trimester appointments, the same weeks your doctor was flagging elevated blood pressure. I'm not a medical professional, and I can't speak to causation, but your attorney is going to want to bring in someone who can speak to what sustained sleep deprivation and financial stress due to a pregnancy, because right now this looks less like carelessness and more like a pattern. That pattern is what finally got Dr. Castellano formally involved, not as a witness pulled in against her will, but as someone who, once she understood the full shape of what had been happening, sat me down in her office and said quietly, "I wish you'd told me in July. I want you to know that. Not so you feel guilty. So you know that if this ever happens again, to you or to anyone you know, the door is open the second you're ready to walk through it." She documented, at Ashford's request, the full clinical timeline, the elevated blood pressure readings across 3 consecutive appointments, the weight loss, her own contemporaneous notes about my evasiveness when asked about sleep, and her professional opinion, stated carefully, within the bounds of what she could actually attest to, that the pattern was consistent with chronic sleep deprivation, exacerbating gestational hypertension risk. It wasn't a smoking gun on its own. Ashford was clear about that. But combined with Priya's financial trail and the texts I'd saved, "You can come back up now," the same 4 words for 2 months, 40-some nights, sitting in my phone like a fossil record of exactly how little I'd been worth to him after 10 p.m., it built something that no longer looked like an unfortunate rough patch in a young marriage. It looked like a documented pattern of coercive control layered on top of financial fraud. The crisis peak came 19 days before my due date, on a Thursday, when Ashford called and told me Ryan's attorney had reached out wanting to resolve things quietly before any of it became part of a public filing. "That means he knows what we have," Ashford said, "and it means he's scared of what happens if it goes on the record. I have to be straight with you, Emma. You have real leverage here, but you also have 19 days until your due date, and every day this drags out is a day you're managing a divorce and a fraud claim on top of preparing to give birth. I want your input on how hard we push." My hands were shaking by the time I hung up the phone, and not the ordinary kind of shaking, a deep, involuntary tremor that started in my fingers and worked up into my forearms, the kind Dr. Castellano had warned me could be a stress response worth mentioning at my next appointment. 19 days. I did the math obsessively, the way you do when a number becomes the only stable thing in a spinning room. 19 days to decide how hard to push, minus however many days a settlement negotiation might eat, minus the unknowable number of days my body might decide on its own schedule that it was done waiting. Willa had already dropped 2 centimeters lower according to my last appointment. Every twinge in my lower back sent a jolt of pure panic through me. Not is this labor, but is there still time? I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, my sister's guest room bed by then, because I'd moved out 3 days after the cot appeared and never moved back, with my hand on my belly, feeling her shift and roll, and thinking that I had exactly one chance to do this, right before my whole life reorganized itself around a newborn instead. I called Rachel into the room and just said, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to fight this and give birth in the same month," and she sat next to me and said, "You don't have to be strong enough alone. That's what the rest of us are for," which is a sentence I now keep taped inside a kitchen cabinet where I see it every single morning. "I don't want quiet," I said. "I want it documented. All of it. I don't ever want to wonder, 5 years from now, whether I let him off easy because I was tired." The exposure, when it came, wasn't dramatic in the way the streaming service version of this story would have staged it. There was no courtroom gasp, no single perfect line that ended a career. It came in stages, the way most real accountability does. First, the civil filing, the divorce petition, which under our state's laws required sworn financial disclosures from both parties under penalty of perjury, meaning Ryan's underreported income and the undisclosed account became part of a public record that his own employer's HR department, following a routine background check refresh tied to an internal promotion review, flagged during due diligence. He didn't get the promotion he'd spent 2 years chasing. 6 weeks later, following an internal review into expense reimbursements that Priya's tracing had incidentally surfaced, reimbursements he'd claimed for apartment costs his mother was independently covering, submitted through his company's expense portal with her Venmo confirmations attached as if they were his own out-of-pocket payments. He didn't have a job at all. Priya later told me, with the kind of dry understatement I'd come to appreciate from her, that most people who commit this sort of thing don't get caught by a stranger. They get caught by their own paper trail eventually, because paper trails don't get tired and stop keeping receipts. Second, the protective financial order Ashford secured, freezing the undisclosed account before Ryan could move the remaining balance, which by that point sat just under $19,000. That money, along with a negotiated settlement covering the rest of what Priya had traced, became the down payment on stability I hadn't let myself imagine yet. First and last month's rent on a 1-bedroom of my own, bed, a crib, 6 months of breathing room. Third, and this was the part that surprised me most, Dana didn't disappear from the story the way I'd expected an in-law to once her son's marriage ended. She testified when it came to it, not against Ryan out of spite, but simply by telling the truth about what she'd seen that night in the parking lot and what she'd learned afterward about the rent. In her statement, prepared with Ashford, she said something that Priya later told me she'd never forget from 14 years of these cases. I raised him to believe that taking care of family meant something. I did not raise him to let his pregnant wife sleep in a car so he could collect a reimbursement check for the roof I was already paying for. Ryan never went to prison. This wasn't a criminal fraud case in the end, though Ashford noted more than once how close some of the reimbursement claims came to that line, and the threat of a criminal referral was, itself, part of why the civil settlement moved as fast as it did. What he lost instead was quieter, and I think more lasting. His job, his mother's unqualified trust, the marriage, and this is the detail Priya flagged that stuck with me longest. The ability to ever again describe himself to a future partner or a future employer, without that 18-month gap and its explanation trailing behind him. My daughter, Willa, was born 11 days after the settlement was finalized. She has Ryan's dark hair and, as far as I can tell so far, none of anything else. I think about that sometimes. How strange it is that the person who caused so much of that year's damage is also, biologically, half of the reason I have her at all. I don't resolve that thought neatly. I just let it sit there, the way I've learned to let a lot of complicated things sit unresolved. Dana sees Willa every other Sunday. She showed up to the hospital with the same maternity pillow she'd been driving over the night she found me in the parking lot. She'd never gotten the chance to give it to me before everything else happened, and she'd kept it in her closet for 4 months, waiting. She held her granddaughter for the first time and cried in a way I hadn't seen from her since the landing, and said, "I'm just glad I hit traffic that night. I think about that constantly. If I'd gotten home on time, I never would have seen your car." I think about that too. I think about how much of accountability, in the end, depended on one traffic jam on one Friday night, and how much easier it would have been for none of it to ever surface. For me to have kept quietly disappearing into that Civic every night until something worse happened, the way Dr. Castellano had warned it might. I still have the note from moving day. "Welcome home, Em. I've got us." I kept it not out of nostalgia, but because I think it's important to remember that cruelty doesn't usually announce itself at the start. It arrives in small increments. A couch, then a car, then a lie about a paycheck, then another lie stacked on top. And by the time you can see the whole shape of it, you've often already spent months telling yourself it was nothing. It wasn't nothing. If you're reading this, and some quiet version of it sounds familiar, if you've ever caught yourself rehearsing the smaller, more forgivable version of your own story before you tell it to a doctor, a friend, a sister, I hope you say the real one out loud sooner than I did. Mine took a stranger's headlights and a 15-minute drive to a hardware store to finally crack open. Yours doesn't have to wait that long. Willa is 4 months old now. She sleeps in a proper crib, in a proper room, in an apartment where nobody has ever once handed me my own car keys and called it a solution. I sleep there too, every single night.